Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle Edwards. Thank you so much for joining Jet Foundation's virtual workshop series. Today, we're very excited to be having our workshop today hosted on navigating clinical trials in the Duchenne muscular dystrophy space. We're just waiting for a few more people to get on, and then we'll be opening up the presentation. So we'll start in about 1 or 2 minutes. All right, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Danielle Edwards. I am Jet Foundation's Community Engagement Manager. We are so excited to be kicking off our virtual workshop series today, which will be on navigating clinical trials in Duchenne muscular dystrophy by Erica Goody from the Neuromuscular Research Lab at UC Davis. With that being said, we'll kick this webinar off and give it over to Erica.
Great, thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Erica Goody. I work, as Danielle said, at UC Davis Health in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation with the Neuromuscular Research Lab. Kind of before I start, I just wanted to say a big thank you because we have a phenomenal team. Without navigating these clinical trials that we have, it wouldn't be without the team that we have. So in the very top is our clinic and research team together. And then in the bottom or on the side is kind of our research with patients. I just have to give it to everybody now because clinical trials is such a difficult area with the Duchenne community and that there's so many components, and actually the IRB has said that it's the most difficult studies that there are. And I have to say first, thank you to all the community members, the Jet Foundation, to our team, and to the patients and families for having that commitment to make this what it is. So what I'm going to be talking about is research and what to do and how do you navigate clinical trials. So this is such an exciting time for Duchenne research. There's so many options and so many choices for everybody, but with that becomes a lot of responsibility. So I kind of think of when you're a family member, when you're a patient, when you're a participant, how do you decide what study is the right study for you? Because now you have all these options. There's not just one clinical trial. So I always go to the fundamentals, ask the basic questions. Who, what, where, when, and why? I know it sounds simple, but you can break it down. And when you kind of think of that, it will help you decide what is best. So first, who? Who is the PI? The PI is the principal investigator or the physician that is in charge of the study that you would be attending. Then think about the pharmaceutical company. I would go ahead and research, kind of see what they're about, what the company is about, understand the fundamentals of the who, because you'll be spending a lot of time with this team. Now think about what, the study itself. This can get really nitty gritty and into it. But what you need to think about is the phase of the study. I'm not going to go too far into the phase of the study, but just think that there's like phase 1, 2, 3, and 4. the beginning of the phases is more of safety, and then as they get later, they're beginning to show efficacy of study results, or they're going farther along and there's more safety data that's out there. Then think about the phase of the study, the drug, how is the drug administered, what's the design like, things like that. Then think about when does it actually start? How long is this study? Is there an extension phase or an open label phase? And now for the extension phase and open label phase, kind of what I want to say that's nice about the Duchenne clinical trials that we're seeing right now is that most Duchenne clinical trials are having an extension or open label phase. Now, what has happened, and I know it's very disappointing for us as researchers, as well as you guys for family members, is that there will be an extension or open label phase, but if the original study doesn't show data to be efficacy, then they won't go on. So that is something that's a drawback that everybody should kind of know about. Then know is, why is the study being conducted? What is the overall reason that they're doing this study? Is it for better pulmonary results? Is it strength increasing? So when you break down those and you kind of understand the bulk of what the study is, it's really important, because then you're starting to then go farther in. And what I like to do is then go to clinicaltrials.gov. Now, Jet Foundation has some wonderful handouts about studies that are going on. I know PPMD has something. There's all these kind of great tools. Clinicaltrials.gov is great. It's great for anything. Every study, not just Duchenne, it'll have a search history, and you write Duchenne muscular dystrophy or just Duchenne, and it'll pop up studies. If you look right here, it says there's 228 studies. This was old. I actually did a search this morning. And there's 281 Duchenne research studies on clinicaltrials.gov. That's phenomenal, right? Well, what you need to think about is it needs to be tailored down to you. So what I would do is I would review the inclusion-exclusion criteria. That way you could see what the study is and how it goes for you. So look at the inclusion-exclusion criteria. That is whether you would be, what determines if you can be in the study or not in the study. So for example, age. That is a very easy thing for you guys to filter first. How old is the participant to be in the study? Then think about ability of strength and then current medications. See if this is actually manageable for your family. So is this something that you guys could do? Is this something that you think would be sufficient? If you're able to fly once a week, could you do that? If there's not something that's locally close, these are things that you kind of need to think about. Then think about, would they actually be able to complete the study procedures that are being asked? So for one study, for example, there is an MRI. And the MRI was an inclusion-exclusion criteria, and it can be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. So what we kind of did is we would ask a patient to lay still on our exam table, and if they couldn't just lay still for 30 seconds, 5 minutes, without getting the willies and stuff, these are children, then we would say to the family, do you think that they would be able to do an MRI? That isn't something we will always screen and give a patient the ability, but you guys as parents really know what's best for your child. And so sometimes you can actually answer these questions on your own. And the other thing are like biopsies. That's just a big, tough question for the community that feels that if it's part of the study, are you willing to do a biopsy? So things that I think are tips is to ask for a copy of the consent form, to talk to the research coordinator or clinical evaluator, and to ask questions. So I really think that if you take those two tools, the who, what, when, why, and then you take the clinicaltrials.gov and you take your individual child, it will help you kind of weed down some of those, this really complex process, because if there's 281 studies, if you start kind of going through it, then you might be able to bring it down to 5 or 3. So something I kind of wanted to talk about new is COVID-19. So obviously, the Jet Foundation has changed. We're doing this virtual webinar. It's the first one that I've ever done. Things are changing with COVID-19, and they might change back to normal. They might this might be our new normal. Who knows, right? Right now, it's a very unknown. And I think that instead of diving deep into it, I always like to have a plan for a plan to have a plan. Very research coordinator of me to kind of have multiple backup plans. So what I would give a tip to the families is that know that for Duchenne research, you can kind of come in from anywhere to participate. We've had families from Alaska, Hawaii, we've had our local families. I think we had one in New York as well. We've had a lot of families come in from around the United States to see us. So know that with each research unit, the COVID-19 situation can vary in location. It can vary of what's like the timing of everything, and it's just all subject to change. And so I think if you're just aware of that and kind of go, okay, this is just a different thing, and UC Davis might be different than Holmes, and it becomes easier to kind of realize and be able to participate with all of the other research components to it. So what's happening now that we're seeing in the research world is a lot of the studies are kind of developing a COVID-19 study plan because it's really important that we continue research, in particular for Duchenne, to get those study results. So a lot of the actual pharmaceutical companies are creating plans. And I would encourage you guys, if you're choosing a study, that once you go through your list of what you think would be a good fit, you ask the research coordinator, do you guys have a COVID-19 plan? Because then it would be good for you to be aware and know, okay, so if the pandemic hits or whatever, what are my study responsibilities at that point? And there might not be one in place, but it's good to kind of just ask those questions. The other thing that I want people to plan for is travel. So COVID-19, are there travel restrictions if you were to come in? What would they be? What would they look like? If you can't fly in or you don't feel comfortable flying in, could you get a car? Could you get a hotel? Can you do a plane? And are you just okay with traveling? And that's something that you kind of just need to think about. We had a patient that was in the middle of the pandemic that flew from Hawaii, and we made everything as safe as possible. They felt very safe, and we made it work, and we made it work. And it doesn't mean that anybody's choice is wrong. It's what's best for that individual. So the study sites. So this is also kind of what I want people to think about, is that all hospitals are having new requirements because of it, and our hospital is calling it like a ramp up or ramp down. So when it's ramped up, then it's a little bit more secure, or there's more requirements, or can ramp down. There's different levels. So for us to get in, there's a survey that we have to complete as staff members, but also I believe patients have to just kind of do a little questionnaire as well. There's a temperature check and a masking that's mandatory before entering. What they're also doing is restricting guests. Now, the only reason why I'm kind of putting this in, because it's not a big deal to some people, but I've been to consented families, and there's been 20 people, family members, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, when I'm consenting for a clinical trial in. And at this point, the hospital's restricting that. So you need to think about, as a caregiver, are you okay with that restriction that there's only one person that can go in? You need to think about that, and who would that be, and explain that to your child. Then, I'm not saying that we wouldn't consent and do that. We could get there's ways that we could do certain things to incorporate the other family members. We could do a Zoom, and we could FaceTime, things like that, so that they're there for the consenting. But for other things, we're not going to be carrying a phone to go get a blood draw just so dad can be there with mom. That's a little too much for us to do. So you really need to think about these restrictions that are in place, and if that's okay with you guys. So now I'm going to talk about consent and assent, because now we've kind of I'm taking you through the process of deciding if you want to be in a clinical trial. You kind of look at it, you go and do your research, you evaluate the actual location about COVID-19 if something was to happen, and now it comes down to consent and assent. So what I always ask family members to do is ask for a copy of the consent form prior to your visit, and then write down your questions. The consent forms are usually about 20 pages long, and they're about an hour of consenting. And I always say bring snacks or activities for your child, because if they keep interrupting, it's really hard for you to follow. But I really think that it's important that you guys ask for that consent form beforehand, is that it's a big commitment that's being made, and there's a ton of detail in there. And I find that it's easier for me to kind of read everything prior and to really navigate that way, as opposed to having a doctor there or coordinator there and reading this consent form, being distracted by a child, and then you're just kind of feeling all these kind of emotions, where this will actually prepare you as a family member to objectively make a decision. Now, the one thing about consent that's great that people forget about all the time is that it's ongoing. That means at any time you can ask the study coordinator, the physician, anybody questions about the study. It's always ongoing. Now, the one thing that I always like to tell families, and I'll say it now because this will be open up to questions too, is that you guys have great questions. There are great questions and feedback and things like that, and we don't always have the answers right on the spot. So with that being said, is give us time to also do the research for your answers. That we need to find the research if you're asking about something that maybe we haven't heard about yet, but it is valid. We don't know about it. We'll have to research and then get back to you. So now you consented and you're now in a clinical trial. So the average clinical trial design for Duchenne studies vary on the design itself. So it depends on the drug, you know, what's the route of the drug, how long do you have to take the drug, is it IV, is it a pill, you need to take it daily, weekly, is it infusion? There's different ways for the drug itself, so each protocol is going to vary. Then the primary outcome measure. So that's what's the main focus of the study, and I always kind of like to think about as elementary school science fair projects. You know, you have your hypothesis and then you pick how you're going to test it and then you go forward. Well, think of this as a more complex way, is that here's their study and now they want to test it, but they have the ways they're going to test it and how we have to go about it. And then you think about the phase of the study. What we are seeing some common things that I can share with you guys is the actual average clinical trial design for clinical evaluators. This is becoming very similar setup to kind of expect for us as well as for you guys. So typically for the clinical evaluator, that's the strength testing to see if the drug is actually working to maintain or strengthen or weaken the muscular dystrophy itself. So first you have screening day 1. Immediately after that, you have screening day 2. About 2 weeks later, you have baseline visit. And then about every 12 weeks, you'll be coming back for the duration of the trial for 96 weeks. This is an average. Again, it's not like written in stone. And CE testing is ranging about 2 to 2.5 hours. So when you kind of know that, I think that it helps you understand what you're going through and what you're signing up for. So things that people should also be aware of is outcome measures have a predetermined order. So each protocol has a different order and a different manual. So hands down to our clinical evaluators and coordinators out there, because I think sometimes it gets lost by everybody how much detail and organization is in it and how much credit the coordinators and evaluators should get. And what I'm meaning is that there's like 5-minute breaks for vitals for one study, and then one study is 10 minutes. And they have to remember for 30 Duchenne studies, each separate protocol, and exactly what orders testing needs to be in, when there should be breaks, when there shouldn't be breaks, if you can cheer during a 6-minute walk, if you can't share, if you're supposed to videotape or not. And that's a lot of details that get lost kind of communicating to everybody, but it's super important to show that the testing is working and validation. So hand down to you guys. Something for the families to know also is that the CE testing typically is in the morning. So we here at UC Davis try to be pretty flexible with when we have visits in a way that we can be. But one way that is hard for us is that testing typically has to be in the morning. So if you're kind of coming for screening day 1 and day 2, but you're flying in, you need to be aware that we might be asking you to come in the day before, so your child's not fatigued and has the best chance to get in. Things that I want to talk about too is the psychological stressor. This is for families and children. I think that sometimes mental health and psychological stresses don't get communicated enough. And I think it's okay to talk about feelings. So the participant needs to perform at a certain level to be eligible for a study. That's really hard on the family members. It's really hard on the patients. And I want you guys to know that it's also really hard on us as staff members, that we actually want to enroll and include everybody in the study, but we have certain requirements. So that's really difficult. The other part that can be difficult is, you know, the child being tired and fatigued. We really ask a lot to be done, and that can really kind of weigh them out. And the third thing is like kind of missing out on life. You know, they're going to be missing, you guys will be missing work, school, friends, family events just to do this. And so I think that it's really important that the research centers, the research labs try their best to make things as enjoyable as they can. We really do try in our way to do that. And I commend our team for really believing in that. But also what I'm going to talk about here is what can you do as a parent to make it better? This is a lot, right? So one thing that I've seen that I think could be improved on is to not have leading questions. For example, before the 6-minute walk test, to not say to your child, I know the 6-minute walk test will make you tired. Well, you're already kind of feeding them with how they should be feeling about the situation. So as a solution, do your best. I'm so proud of you. You're doing awesome. Good job. Keep it up. You know, like, you're phenomenal. You're giving back to the greater good. You know, things like that are really positive and impactful and helpful for children. Give them ownership and pride. They are doing so much. What they're doing is and should be acknowledged and validated for their hard work that they're doing, 100%. And I think that there's different ways that I've seen family members do this, and they're phenomenal. One family member had a box, and it was like every time that they completed something off the checkoff list, because she made it from the consent form, he got to punch through this box and grab a prize. I've had our clinical evaluators be able to make a checklist, and then every time that they complete something, the kid gets to check it off. And who doesn't like checking things off the list and seeing it go down to nothing? And then we have a prize bucket. So it's all these little things that, like, you want them to feel like they're not just contributing something big, but they're earning something, they're doing something. It's great. And then build a relationship with the study team. So this journey isn't easy for a clinical trial. You know, there's a lot of ups and downs, positives. You know, it's a lot of commitment, and you will create a good bond with your coordinator and the clinical evaluator and myself and the doctor. But it's really important that you build that relationship. And kind of what I've been seeing too is, like, on that, be cognizant of what you say in front of the children, because they pick up on everything and they're so smart that I've heard parents go in front of them, like, the child has no problem with the blood draw, and they're like, oh, they're having such a hard time with the blood draw, and then all of a sudden it's a meltdown. Well, maybe we could think of a different way to acknowledge that with each other and communicate better, right? So we could talk privately in a room without them there, so then we can kind of help navigate the feelings a little bit more effectively, and not kind of lead how the child should be feeling, but acknowledge the feeling. So sharing data and results, especially with this world of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and FaceTiming, and I mean, this is such a virtual world that I always put this slide in because I think it's important to always revisit it. And apologies for everybody who's seen it before, but I just think it's always good to revisit. It is important to keep research information confidential, period. It's really important for the integrity of the study. So we will share data for you that is important for your child's health or anybody's health. For example, if there are labs that are drawn and it shows that there could be a UTI, that will be, immediately communicated. There would be a redraw or a recommendation to see the PCP. If there was something that, a physician was concerned with, they might order an extra EKG or renal ultrasound. It's not that those things would not be shared with you. What we're really talking about is the efficacy of data for like the strength and functional assessments in particular, is that those really need to be at a specific time. When we keep those results confidential, and it's important for FDA approval, it helps maintain the validity of efficacy endpoints, and it also helps maintain the blind for randomized studies. Remember, it's not just, it's hard to say, but it's not just your child, it's the entire community that we're coming together. And so with that, we want to make sure your child's safe. That's focusing on your child, that they're as safe as possible. But for the whole community, we're trying to also get this drug approved if possible, if it's, if it shows efficacy, so then the whole community can be eligible for it. So again, I wanted to say thank you to my entire team. This must have been before, COVID-19, not practicing social distancing here. Huge thank you to our community members. And right here, I wanted to focus on our Halloween party. This isn't diving into clinical trials, but I think this is a really important time to think about community and the greater good. So every year we have a Halloween party and we open it up, we shut down our lab, and we open up to the neuromuscular community. And each year it grows and grows and grows. And it's really a time for us to connect, to be silly, to be fun, and to recognize each person as an individual. And I think that's really important, especially right now, that we all try to come together. And lastly, discovering creates hope. Right now, this is a time of hope. The research is super exciting. It's growing. It's a difficult journey, but it's a great journey, and we're creating so much hope for our boys that I think we just need to continue that, and we just work together, and I think we'll see really phenomenal things happen because of it. So thank you. And now questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica, for that presentation. It was fantastic. As Erica said, we're just going to be opening right now the chat up to any questions you may have for her.
Sorry, I'm trying to see the. What are some questions that you think parents should be asking when interested in a clinical trial? After you decide, so when you kind of look at the study itself and you think that this is what you want to do, I would definitely see if you can set up an appointment with either your neuromuscular physician or the PI of the actual study where you'd be going. And I would ask questions like, are there any risks that are known to the study? What are the potential benefits of the study? I mean, it will say it in the consent form, but sometimes to hear it from a physician and their viewpoint is really encouraging. And so that's what I would do, is kind of just really then say, what are the risks? What are the benefits? And then if you have any questions of the visits, and you could ask the coordinator, what are the visits going to look like? And they would say, okay, well, here's an example of an itinerary for a typical day. And you're like, okay, I could do that. But then say it's all day, you're like, I don't know if I could do that every week because I have 3 other kids and I'm having to do online learning and all of this stuff. So that's where I would kind of like ask those questions. The next one is, my son is eligible for 2 trials. How do I pick which one to enroll? That is a hard one, and that is what I think a lot of our families are facing. This is how I would kind of figure it out in these situations, is I would just create a list, and you would have one study name here and one study name there, and do a pro and a con, and a pro and a con. And I would just really dive down deep of pro and con, and then have that meeting with the study physician and say, here's kind of like, I'm thinking about these 2 studies, and say they're both pro and cons are weighing each other out. Then you ask their opinion of what they think would be most beneficial. The other thing I look at is what the phase of the study would be, and kind of like the open, if they are saying that there's going to be an open label or an extension phase or something like that, because you know, is it a double-blind study? Because if it's a double-blind study, that means that you could be 50-50 on drug or placebo. But if it's just everybody gets drug, then that might be something that's more of a potential for you. So I would do that pros and cons list, and then get the kind of the weigh-in. And I always ask family members to feel free to call us and email me and kind of ask these questions, and I help them navigate kind of these questions that they might have. I don't pretend to be a physician. I'm not going to dive down to the level that Dr. McDonald would be. But I really try to be there of saying, okay, well, this is what one study's asking, and this is what the other study is asking. And that part I think is difficult, and it's hard to navigate, and I'm happy to help navigate families to this really complex situation. UC Davis in Sacramento, California. Somebody asked where UC Davis is. So I would say like we're about an hour and a half from San Francisco. So we have an airport. It actually is a great small hub airport. We have actually a lot of families from SoCal that prefer to come to us because it's almost like less traffic to fly to us than to go through LA. We have a great small little cute airport. We have a Marriott that's right next door to the hospital that families stay at that they like for our clinical trials. I think we've sometimes had people fly from San Francisco, but typically, and then drive in, but typically everybody flies to Sacramento. And it's a pretty, if you look it up, Sacramento, it has a pretty good catchment. And then a tip for you guys as family members, if you're doing a clinical trial and you become a jet setter, because you're going to all these things, sign up for those frequent flyer miles and those Marriott points so you can get your little free vacation. You guys are putting in the time and you're staying, so you can still earn those points to get it. My own little plug for you guys to kind of get something. Maybe you can go on a nice vacation out of it. How can I get my clinic to be more like your clinic? Thank you, that's really sweet. So I think what's different with our research, and I don't want to call us a clinic because we're a research lab, and that's what's different is we really kind of grew, we work with clinic, but we really grew our research lab to be independent. And I think that's really what helped us, is that once we kind of didn't have to coordinate with clinic, and it opened up more opportunities for more research studies, and it opened up more opportunities for more staffing to be hired and more visits. So I'm always, I've done kind of similar talks, but to other healthcare professionals about how to kind of build up their research unit and research lab to be similar to ours. So you could ask, you know, if they were ever interested, they could reach out to me, but really it's kind of their interest in research. We're really fortunate here in Sacramento at UC Davis because Dr. McDonald is immersed in research and he lives and breathes it. So it helped kind of create this infrastructure that we have. So this is a good question. Trying to put a son on an approved exon skipping drug. So most likely this is Exondys. If it works, will it disqualify him for most trials? How can I know? Can I interrupt the treatment and qualify for a trial after a few months? So each study is different. Each study kind of has been having a washout period to do things. So if you can get on an approved drug, that's phenomenal. If you're thinking about another clinical trial, I think what I would kind of, what you would want to think about is where is it in the study design to then go into another study where you know that one drug showed some efficacy to be approved by FDA. This is a personal question. How would you know if it disqualifies him? So when you go on clinicaltrials.gov, typically it will say like medications that you cannot be on, and it would say any type of gene therapy in the last 3 months. I'm giving just a random example. If it says that, then you would know that you would have to wash out. The other things that I want to tell families is that I don't discourage it. This is all your guys' kind of choice of what you think would be best and it could fit. But what you need to really think about is if you stop one to screen for another study, what is the likelihood also that you'll be in? Because remember, you're screening to be in a study. So for this question in particular, if you have Exondys, and you're on Exondys, I think it's called something else now that it's trade name, but you know what I'm talking about. And if you're on that and then you want to be in a clinical trial, you could be in it and you wash out and then you screen, what's the likelihood of you getting into that study? What's the likelihood of this being a double-blind study and you being on placebo? Those are all things that you think about. I would think about before kind of going from one study to another or one approved drug. For the one study to another study, the thing that I always kind of put on my community hat is you really need to think about is that for all of the patients and knowing if a drug works or not, or a study is validated, is that it really is best for you to go beginning to end so that they have that study results to see if it is something that is a potential benefit for other patients. If we had everybody jump from study to study, then we kind of would be in this like backward set of not really getting anything approved. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying think really hard before you make certain choices to make sure that it's a right fit. When there are only a few slots in a trial, but many applicants, how are people chosen in the order that they are screened or a certain number from each testing site? So that's a good question. And I think it varies from location to location. What we try to do is we try to just get all the patients in that are potentials in our site. I think very rarely we've actually had to turn away patients that did not meet the criteria. But for other sites, you know, they might have a capacity limit. So when you go on clinicaltrials.gov, you'll see all the sites that are listed, right? So you'll see UC Davis or UCLA or Cincinnati, Ohio. There's going to be all of these lists that are the people that are participating in the study. So when you see something and you know that you want to be on it, I would definitely reach out to the coordinator early on. I would keep that contact with them. And then I would also know that What's kind of hard for us in the research world, when I'm talking about the coordinators and myself and the clinical evaluators, as opposed to the clinicians and the pharma companies and maybe the advocacy groups, is that they'll tell you that there's going to be this study and it's super exciting and we're excited and we get chosen as a site, but we have all of this paperwork that takes about 3 months to process before we can get somebody in. And I think that sometimes gets lost in translation, that they'll be like, oh, you're ready to start this study. And we might have gotten all the documents, but we have a lot to put in administratively before we can actually move forward. What should I be asking my coordinator? I would ask your coordinator kind of what the average day would be like, who you would be the main contact, who's the main contact for questions whenever you have a question, what's the best way to get a hold of somebody, how do you schedule. It kind of depends on what you're wanting to go through for the coordinator. Nope, I went too far. Should I post our experience with a clinical trial on social media? What are things I should or shouldn't post about? So I think, I mean, freedom of speech, like I can't say what you can or can't do. I think it's important to share how you feel about, you know, something about a clinical trial and stuff like that, but you also have to be conscientious of what you say can influence others. So I always just kind of think of, is it something that, you know, if it was a great experience and you would encourage people or you have tips, absolutely, I think things like that. But once you kind of start going certain ways, that you also think about, like, am I influencing somebody the wrong way where this would be a benefit for them? And I think that's a hard thing with social media, is that people are kind of thinking of it as their diary. And I'm not saying that it's wrong or right, but you can influence others and it can kind of become a little intense. What we're asking, like, not to be shared is, you know, is that, you know, certain adverse events that might be happening, or maybe not so much adverse events. I mean, you should be kind of keeping things close knit to your family, but like, if you think they're getting super duper strong, you know, because you don't want another family, you know, you have to be sensitive about everybody. So what if you're saying, oh, my son's getting really strong, but then somebody else's son is getting weak and they're on your Facebook page and then they're feeling a certain way and then they want to drop out, but then they're actually on study drug, you know, because we're blinded and we don't know. So I kind of think that people should post certain things and then also think back of what they shouldn't post. Like, one of the family members that I thought was a great post that they did is that she posted that reward box and how to make it fun for her kid. Absolutely share that, because that's a tool that every parent, like I could use as a parent for my child. How do I drop out of a clinical trial? Am I allowed to enroll into another one? So yeah, you're absolutely allowed to drop out at any time, and you're allowed to enroll in a clinical trial depending on the inclusion-exclusion criteria. Kind of what I said before is you want to be a little bit aware of when you do. What I would, it's hard to say because it's your choice, but I always think that it's always best to try and finish a study if you can. And I think it would be like, if you're dropping out of a clinical trial, that's 100% okay. All the study sites kind of really encourage you guys to come in and actually do a closeout visit so they can get those clinical evaluator assessments to kind of really collect data in an organized fashion. I'd encourage that. So if you want to be a drop out of a study, that's okay. And then have that. And then if you're allowed to enroll in another study, it's called a washout phase. So you would just look at the other study that's an option and then see how long that break from being on one study to another. Some it's 3 months, some it's 6 months. It kind of varies from everybody. Everybody being every study. How can I prep my son before screening for a clinical trial? That's great. That's a really great question. we like to kind of have a pre-screening. So I know we vary from other labs on how we do this, but say we have a patient in clinic that is potentially going to enroll, the family is interested and everything. We'll sometimes ask the patient to come over and just give a tour of the lab, to kind of let them see who we are, see what it looks like, so it's less intimidating, and then maybe do a 6-minute walk test or like some strength assessments without that pressure. Now, for you to prepare your son, I would just say, and this kind of comes to a personal point of what what you're comfortable with sharing with your kid. I kind of find being honest, but also being sensitive to their age. Hey, we're going to try and do this study. Our hope is that maybe it will help, but you will be helping other boys for the future that have muscular dystrophy. Here are some things that might happen or that are going to happen. I mean, they should know that they're getting a blood draw, and they should know that they're going to have certain things happen to them, so then it's not like a freak out. But we definitely make it as fun and as rewarding as possible with all the things that are being done. What other research studies out there besides just clinical trials? Great question. So due to COVID-19, what's kind of happening is that there's different phases that have been approved to kind of move forward. So our lab hasn't shut down at all, and we are currently 100% going on clinical trials. So that's the thing, is that you have to be doing something that is a benefit or could be potentially a benefit. We can't have people right now coming in to the lab for observational study until they let us know that it's okay to, because they don't want to have a risk without a potential benefit, if that makes sense. Now, what we are working on, which would be exciting, is some sort of kind of remote, like lab testing where, maybe there's something we can do, something virtual. We're just how everybody's having to adapt to the situation. Research is also adapting, and so that's something that we might have to think about, and that we're gearing up to do those kind of things. What happens if my clinical trial fails or ends because it didn't hit endpoints? That is a super disappointing thing that is to the community. It's disappointing to the family members, and it's disappointing to researchers. There's really nothing that we can do except acknowledge the hurt of something failing, and we're right there with you, and then kind of just continue that hope for one of the other studies that there will be a potential benefit. How do you prepare a younger child for a screening? Tell them enough to prepare the child, but not too much to scare them. I'd be happy, if ever there's a little kid, to kind of like you said, like prepare them, but not too much, and kind of right in the middle. I think that you don't overdo it. You acknowledge it. I really just think that it kind of goes to the level, so we've had 4-year-olds and stuff like that. And, you let them know there's going to be a blood draw, and that they're going to have to swallow a pill, and that they're going to be doing some assessments like exercise, but I would keep it very to their level. And then kind of what happens is that the coordinator and the staff team should really work with you and the child to kind of see what works. Some kids, a cell phone is a trick for a blood draw and they just watch it. Another kid just loves watching his blood get drawn. Every kid's kind of different on how they do things. And I think really what I can acknowledge from my team is that just like every person's different, and for our team, what's awesome is that we're all different and have our different strengths. Every child has different strengths and weaknesses, so it's really up to us to try and work with you to be able to prepare them enough so you could let us know a little bit about things that they don't like, so we know, and then things that they do. Sometimes parents tell us that their kids are obsessed with Star Wars, so we try to like Google all the Star Wars characters. So when the CE person is testing, they're like, can drop some names and have a dialogue and then continue. So it's those kind of tips that I kind of feel like are helpful too. I think that was the last of the questions. Wow, you guys asked some great questions and put me on the spot. Hopefully I helped some. Are there any other questions or anything else, Danielle, that you could think of?
No, I think those are all fantastic questions, and I just want to say thank you again so much for answering them. I think they were fantastic, and the Star Wars one at the end just really got me there. I think that's just so wonderful to have people like you dedicated so much to this community. So it just means a lot from my end, and I'm sure a lot of parents as well. But I think we had just a fantastic webinar, and if there's any other questions, we will be uploading this to our website, and we will be sharing this as well with the community. So we will be providing Erica's contact information if you guys would like to follow up with her individually as well. But yeah, Erica, thank you so much. It was, a great webinar this afternoon, and we cannot thank you once again for your commitment to our boys.
Anytime. I'm really happy to help the community in any way, and Jet Foundation, and I just encourage all the family members out there to continue staying positive and keep up the hope, and know that you're not alone in this process, that we really are trying our best to help kind of the greater good and to continue research.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. Well, with that being said, everyone, I'll shut down the webinar now, and have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.